All right. Well, everyone, welcome to the pilot episode of Korkie's Corner. Shout out to one of my beer league people who came up with the name for that.
Right.
Um, if when he sees this video, he'll let me know if he wants to be named, but just at the first, I'll keep it private, and then for the next week's episode, I will give him a shout out. Corky's Corner because my last name is Jonathan Corky, and I have on me with my dad. He is a published author, wrote Ice Cold and Deadly, is working on Seeking Sad Guru. And then is there anything else you wanted me to kind of help promote? Uh,
No, well, I guess we can promote my upcoming book, The Bettman Conspiracy, which will be
oh,
coming out as soon as I can get it written, and
oh,
it'll
sorry.
probably segue us right into the Stanley Cup Finals topic that you have at some point. We could start there if you wanted. Your audio just went out, John. You got to stay in front of your.
Okay. Um, if there's one thing that my dad loves, it's when Southern markets succeed. Because I guess he grew up in Canada and everything. But how much hockey have you watched since the Oilers and Leafs got eliminated?
Not 1 second, not a single second. It's a joke, and I don't have anything against Southern markets per se. I lived in Raleigh, Greensboro. Really, I think North Carolina is the best state in the union. I'm up in New York now, but I do miss North Carolina. I would say that what I hate more than a Canadian team not winning the Stanley Cup in 30 years, in spite of absolutely astronomical 1 in a billion odds of that happening without corruption. What I hate more is just the fact that Gary Bettman is allowed to get away with this.
Yeah. Well, that does transition because I haven't been watching a lot of the Stanley Cup finals either, just with my work schedule. And Florida Vegas isn't something I want to go out of my way to watch because I'm cheering for Florida, but Vegas is going to win. And I don't care enough about Florida to pick a team. But on to that. So, on to the sale. Speaking of Gary Bettman, have you been following the sale of the Ottawa Senators at all?
A little bit. I've heard that one of the buyers, the key buyer with the biggest money offer, drawing a blank on his name, has just recently dropped out, and he was talking in the neighborhood of $1 billion for the Ottawa Senators.
Yep. And you know who else bought out, which I think is the biggest missed opportunity? I kind of get the first one, but the Remington group with Ryan Reynolds dropped out. And I think that was the biggest missed opportunity. But the rumor is Gary Bettman is this is pure speculation, I think. Like I heard it from a source that's from a source, is that Gary Bettman's trying to get his friend to own 10% of the Montreal Canadiens to be able to get enough investors to become the top bidder, and that's a big part of why it may be holding off.
Well, then at least the Canadian team's going to win within the next 5 years because he's going to have Ottawa win the Stanley Cup. So let's all the Canadian hockey fans out there cheer for Gary Bettman's buddy to win to buy the Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, because he has the lowest bidder. He's the sale that's put in a bid and is still trying to get investors. It's apparently Gary Bettman's friend who owned 10% of the Montreal Canadiens, and then he sold it to be able to try and buy Ottawa. Now, that is pure speculation, but I can see it because the NHL ownership group is a very tight bubble.
Well, all you have to pay attention to is if the Senators start getting all kinds of favorable calls from the referees, or if they never get a suspension at all, then you know that it's not just a conspiracy theory.
Well, you do know Petrangelo got suspended for the price of this last.
Yeah, he should have gotten 2 games, and Darnell Nurse should have gotten 0 games, and that's what the NHL does. Is all it takes. The competition in the NHL is so tight with the salary cap and the talent pool can be equalized so quickly because of the cap that it only takes pulling a small lever here or there to flip the balance the way that they want. And they don't necessarily want to flip the balance to, oh, we want Carolina to win the cup, so we're gonna fix it. This isn't the WWE. All you have to do, though, is when you want a certain group of teams to win, you just need to if you want Southern teams to win, you just need to make sure they get an extra call or two, and the odds will even out to get the result that they want.
Haven't really won. Like they had like Tampa Bay, sure, but Tampa Bay's been well run for 2 decades now. Consistently well run with a good ownership group and Stevie Eiserman. But I mean, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and then I guess Washington would be a southern market, but it took them over a decade to win a cup with the best goal scorer of all time. So if you look at like,
Listen, Jonathan, poor Jonathan. This, I really want you to understand this. I told you before, and this will all be in the Bettman conspiracy, so you'll be able to read about it later. But there's tiers. The number one tier is Gary's favorite southern markets. So as long as a southern market is winning, he doesn't care if it's Tampa or if it's Vegas or if it's Carolina or any. That's where he wants the NHL to expand. The only way that it will expand, because there's only a very small number of relatively of Southern fans, the only way it will expand is if those teams are winning. So they simply need to, that number one tier being the Southern markets, which I call shitty hockey markets. The number one band is the Southern markets. Okay, and then you can go into, okay, well then the next favored tier would be original six teams, particularly the American original six teams. And again, this will all be outlined. I'll think through I think there's about 5 bands, but the lowest on the totem pole is small, what they would call small market Canadian teams. Those are the bottom of the barrel. The top is the Southern market band. So they don't care who's winning, just as long as someone from the Southern markets wins the Stanley Cup, or maybe a Pittsburgh because they're in tier 2 or tier 3.
I mean, I do think I do not think there's this grand conspiracy. I do think there might be some. The only team I really notice a huge amount of favoritism towards, and it could just be because I hate Vegas, so I'm biased against Vegas. So this could be my own bias. Vegas is the only team where I'm like, oh, there might be some gross favoritism that I've seen. I think Vegas is the only real one I've seen that's constant, where it seems like the calls always go their way. I do think Pietrangelo should have got a game. Darnell Nurse's penalty was one of those stupid instigator penalties that I've always been against.
Well, not only is it a stupid penalty, but during the regular season, there's been 2 or 3 incidences within the last year or two where an instigator in the five, which is an automatic game suspension, has been reviewed and overturned. So no suspension, right? So this is what happens in the regular season. Now, if you look at what happens between the regular season and the playoffs, you'll always get less suspension in the playoffs for the same incident than you do in the regular season, because playoff games are deemed to be more important. Each playoff game is more important than each regular season game. So generally speaking, if there's a one game suspension in the playoffs, the same instigator would be, or the same penalty would be 2 games in the regular season, because they're not as valuable games. So in this particular case, it got completely flipped up on side its head, where a suspension that gets overturned in the regular season all of a sudden is now a 1-game suspension. Why? Because Pietrangelo committed that egregious, what should have been a 2-game slash. You go around, raising your stick over your head and hitting somebody in the arm. That is, everybody thought that should be a 2-game suspension. But the NHL, because they cannot allow a small market Canadian team to beat a Southern Belt team, even that up, even though it was, the correct call was 0 games for Darnell Nurse, 2 games for Pietrangelo. The NHL, I would say they don't have the courage to do it, but they just didn't want to do it. They got the result that they wanted.
Okay. I mean, this isn't really a debate show. So I do think a lot of it is like, if you want to talk about the inconsistency of the Department of Player Safety, we can talk about the inconsistency. Like, the biggest problem I have with the way the NHL calls the game is the inconsistency. If they call the playoffs consistently, fine, but they don't call the playoffs consistently. But then they don't call the regular season consistently either. And then they've turned the regular season, which I prefer playoff hockey in general. Like, I prefer the grittier side of hockey, but they don't call the regular season the same way they do call the playoffs, and then they're inconsistent in both. So I do think the problem is, did it negatively impact the Oilers the most? Yes, they did. It negatively impacted the players the most, but a lot of it is just comes from the inconsistency of the Department of Player Safety.
No, it does. There's nothing inconsistent about it. I knew as soon as it happened, I knew that this was what the results were going to be. It was going to be they're going to even it up because again, as we talked about before, all it takes is little tweaks here and there. Everything is so even. It just takes a little tweak here or there to tilt things the way you want them to go. And so they got the result they wanted. Anybody could have predicted it. I mean, there was just no way that they were going to have Vegas have their top defenseman sit out for 2 games while Edmonton's top defenseman or number two, I think he's their number 2 defenseman now. I think Matthias Ekholm is their number 1 defenseman, but nevertheless, Darnell Nurse has been their number 1 defenseman for several years. There's no way that Edmonton was going to get to have their number 1 defenseman playing while Vegas's number 1 defenseman sat out 2 games. There's just no way.
But then also that like makeup calls have been ingrained. Like, oh, we got to make sure calls are even. Has been in hockey for decades. How many times you've coached hockey? How many times you've seen the bench being like, okay, when's our makeup call? Like it's just ingrained in evening things out is in penalties for both sides. That's all the time. Like, oh, this person did something, so now we're going to call this team tighter so we can even one out. That happens in hockey, and that's been in the game for decades.
It'll happen in game, but again, you'll see um, that over time, that if you look at trends, they will not get as many makeup calls for a Canadian team as they would for a American team.
Okay. I mean, I think that would be interesting to analyze, but Canadian teams have had success in hockey. But I do want to transition out of the current NHL playoffs and talk more about the what got you into hockey specifically, kind of, because this is introduction. This is my channel's first exposure to you. What got you into hockey? Because I know you were a Habs fan before the Oilers became a team.
What got me into hockey? Well, I mean, we just grew up with it. It was just a part of our lives. Everybody played hockey. I started playing organized hockey when I was 5, but I started skating as soon as I could. So there was really no other way to go. I didn't know a whole lot of people that didn't play hockey growing up, and it was just always as early as I can remember. The first thing that I remember about the NHL was asking my dad who the best team in the league was. He told me it was Montreal. So immediately I was a Montreal fan. And beyond that, I just fell in love with the way Guy Lafleur played the game of hockey. And in a lot of ways, Connor McDavid, who's even better than Guy Lafleur, kind of has the same style, just that absolute flying down the ice and nobody can stop him. So that's really what I like in hockey. And and so now, when the Oilers, it took me a few years to transition to the Oilers. I didn't do it right away. When they came into the league, I was still more of a Montreal fan until about 1987. And then it was some of those Battle of Albertas that got me to switch over to be a lifelong Oilers fan.
So I have a question. The Flames and Vegas play in the Eastern Conference Final. Who are you cheering?
In the Western Conference Final?
Yeah, Vegas and Calgary.
Yeah, I hate Vegas. I absolutely hate Vegas. It's in the middle of a giant freaking ashtray. It's a garbage city. Yeah, you can quote me on that. Vegas is a freaking garbage city. So I would always cheer for a Canadian team, even Calgary, before I'd cheer for that joke of an organization in Las Vegas.
I mean, the organization as a whole has been pretty successful, to be fair.
They've been propped up. So here's my other thing about the Bettman conspiracy is in the NHL, when you with the salary cap era, you could start an NHL team with no expansion draft. If you just said, here, you have a right, here's your franchise, pay for the franchise. You're not getting any players. You with the salary cap and the crunch that teams are under and the talent that's available, just by having a clean slate salary cap, you could start a team just with that. How do we know this? Because when the KHL and NHL teams have played in the past, there's no draft of KHL teams are not drafting NHL players in some sort of expansion draft. They're simply competing with them major league to major league, and the games have been relatively close. So that an NHL team just starting from a clean slate salary cap would have a decent season, better than any other expansion team in the past. So it can be done with that. So not only did they get a clean slate salary cap, they got the ability to cherry pick players from other teams, and it was unnecessary. Vegas controlled the league for that year that they were coming into the league. They every trade, and some of it was stupidity on the part of other teams, but Vegas was allowed to control every trade that went on that league in that league because there was the sort of uh, the hanging over everybody was this expansion draft. And fortunately, with Seattle, at least teams wised up a little bit, but it was completely unnecessary how much leeway they got to pick players from other teams. And it showed with the making the Stanley Cup in their first year. So really, they started on third base, and now they win the Stanley Cup, they're thinking they're hitting a home run. No, it was handed to them. They were basically promised a Stanley Cup behind closed doors within 5 years.
I don't necessarily agree that the whole thing was handed to him because if you can have things handed to you, and if you're in a league as competitive as the NHL, like you talk about with the flat cap, and if you're not executing the moves properly, you're not going to win a Stanley Cup still.
No, it was you can tell that it's not just their organization. How do we know this? Because even Seattle, who took a much more conservative approach in their first year, they weren't nearly as aggressive as Vegas was. Even they made the playoffs in their second year and won a round. I mean, it's very easy to do with the parameters that those expansion drafts
Well,
laid out.
you can say the expansion draft is too lenient. And while they have had less players to pick on, they've also spent more money to get a team than any of the other teams have spent to get those teams. So, like, you can say,
So
oh, well, they're doing it to get a playoff and everything. But I think really it is. I think if you're going to spend $1 billion to get a team, you should at least be able to pay to be at least competitive. And Seattle was only competitive. And then through year two, they've managed to make the playoffs. But I think by the time you get past the first 2 years, a lot of it is just how are you as a general manager. Oh.
I don't think so. I think having that clean slate salary cap sets you up for far beyond 2 years. I think it as long as you're not a complete idiot, like say a Ron Hextall or a Brian Burke or somebody like that, it will just having that clean slate will carry you for at least 5 years because it gives you look at all the teams that have are carrying dead cap. It really burdens a team in the free agent markets and re-signing players that are key players coming due with new contracts. That burden or that disadvantage of having dead cap, which gets accumulated over many years, that's what gives these expansion teams the advantage that they need.
So I guess you don't like the Seattle Kraken either.
Um, well, I'm not a fan. I mean, I don't find them to be as egregious as the Vegas Golden Knights, but and they've got a few players that I like. I happen to like, Eberle and Larson a little bit. So, um, I don't hate them quite the same way that I do Vegas.
I actually like Seattle A because their branding is some of the best branding in hockey. They like
Yeah, I mean the Golden Knights branding is just shit. It's just pure shit. Those are the ugliest uniforms in the league. So yeah, the fact that the Kraken came up with a killer brand, that does have an impact.
you know what also makes me dislike Vegas is the gambling ad on their jersey. Like the fact that that's going to now be because like the NHL's insist on upping the advertising. So one of those is advertisements on jerseys. The first one that's going to get to be on for the hoisting the cup that'll live on forever is a gambling one. And if that
Yeah.
doesn't showcase a lot of the problems I have with the current NHL product, I don't know what does. Uh,
Now, as big a shithole as Vegas is, I am going there next month for your stepmom's birthday, 50th birthday celebration. So I'll try to have a good time in spite of the fact that they'll be the reigning Stanley Cup champions.
you can go to a parade.
Hopefully the parade will be dead and gone by the time I get there.
You don't want to go see a Stanley Cup parade, even if it's a team you hate.
No, in fact, I'm not even watching the game tomorrow because for the same reason I didn't watch the Patriots Philly game, Super Bowl game a few years ago because I didn't want to see the Patriots host the championship trophy. I don't want to see the Vegas Golden Knights. I won't even. I just refuse to watch that. It's just
Ironically,
a
that's
it's a farce. It's an embarrassment to the NHL.
ironically, I think that's the championship that Brady lost. The Super Bowl you
No, I
think.
know. And I remember thinking, well, I should have watched, but I didn't. I didn't want to take the chance. I didn't even want to take the chance that I might have to watch that and bleach my eyes after that.
Yeah, how did you feel about Brady winning with the Buccaneers a couple years ago?
I mean, I put Brady and Belichick and Mike Krzyzewski all in the same category of people who I really don't like the teams that they play for, but I sure respect how good they are at what they do.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think a lot of people felt that way about the Oilers that you specifically grew up watching in the Battle of Alberta.
Well, I think a lot of people hated the Oilers at that time. And I think a lot of what you see now in terms of bias against the Oilers by the NHL is a lot of lingering um, resentment towards that organization that won all those cups. You look at corrupt individuals like Colin Campbell and the rest of the Peterborough Mafia. Those guys were not a part of the Edmonton Oilers. They resented the fact that Edmonton has the greatest dynasty of all time, and they've been taking it out on them ever since.
I mean, how the Oilers have been to the Cup Finals, I believe. Has it only been once, or did they? Yeah, because I guess Chicago won the Western Conference and then the North again. So
Yeah, I think they've been they've only lost twice. Once to the Cup Finals, they lost to the Islanders, and
right,
then the first time that they went, and then they lost to Carolina, and
yeah, that's
that
right.
was that was only because Carolina deliberately ran their goaltender and
Have
took
you
him out
ever
for the.
watched the highlight? I think
I
I've
watched the highlight, and
the exact.
he accidentally on purpose fell into the goalie, and it changed the whole series.
Okay, I mean that's just wrong. Like it did change the series, but hey, Carolina had scored 3 goals on Dwayne Rollison during that game. He didn't get injured till around the when the it was either 3-3 or 4-3. When and I believe Edmonton got a goal in game one. I don't remember exactly how the scoring went, but it was at least 3-3 when Dwayne Rollison got injured in that game. So that Carolina Hurricanes team was able to score on Dwayne Rollison when he was in. Now, and I do think UC Markkinen was good enough that I do think it wasn't set in stone that if Dwayne Rolson had been healthy the whole series. I think game two is the real game where you can look at and be like, okay, Edmonton could have won game two because Carolina came in and won 5-0. So game two is the game where I think the result may have changed in favor of the Oilers at during that series.
You know
Um,
what? You're bringing back a lot of bad memories. I think it's about time to wrap this up.
I was actually going to ask about I was gonna ask, so you're watching Peaky Blinders now, and I'm wondering what do you think of that show? So we'll finish with something non-hockey related.
Yeah, I found it a little difficult to get into. I'd heard a lot about it, gotten it recommended to me a lot of times, and it's not something that I'll have more to say get further into the series, but I do like it. Yeah, it's not something that I can binge the whole thing, like all 6 seasons very quickly, because it is pretty intense. But I do understand now why people rave
You,
about it.
what is it with you and Kindle the past couple years? If a show's really intense, you guys are like, oh, I don't know if I can watch this. Oh,
Just because it's sort of a hurdle to get into it.
yeah,
You got to be invested in the characters to want to sort of deal with all that intense. And then the other thing is with your brother.
yeah,
For those who don't know, he's only 8, so I can't really watch it when he's around. So
that is fair. Well, thank you for being on. Welcome everyone to the pilot episode. Hopefully, as we continue recordings, they get a little bit less awkward. But this is always the first episode, so.
I
Um,
didn't find that at all. I didn't find it at all awkward, everyone. So I disagree with Jonathan, but it will only get better from here.
yeah, so it will get better. So keep that in mind if you watch this episode and everything. And I assume Dad will, anytime we talk about hockey, Dad will bring up the Bettman conspiracy. But is there any social media or anything you want to plug, Dad, before we head off?
No, I'll keep people up to date as the book writing gets further along.
All right. And yeah, once again, Seeking Sad Guru, I believe the YouTube and Twitter page is up. So if you want to give those pages a follow. And also, if you want to pick up either his book, I think it was Seeking Samantha, correct? Was your second one?
No.
It was.
You got to do your research, man. No, we don't. The only book there's Ice Cold and Deadly. That is a pretty good true crime. I think pretty good true crime story that I wrote, and it's interesting, and that's on Amazon if anybody's interested in that one. And if they're interested in true crime, it's not a well-known story. So a lot of true crime that people read, people already know the story. This is one that most people don't know about.
I thought you had a website about the story on kipyarbles.com where you were writing.
I took it all down, so I will keep people up to date if I get that website going.
Okay. All right. Well, I apologize. I didn't realize you had taken that website down. But yep. Thank you everyone for the first episode of Korkie's Corner. And maybe one day if we get sponsored, we can afford a theme song. But until then, it's going to be just like this. So talk to you guys next week for the next episode of Korkie's Corner.